The Leica M-E. It's basically the cheaper Leica M9 without the USB port or a frame line selector lever. It uses the same full-frame CCD sensor as the M9. You can find a good second-hand Leica M-E for about $2,500 on eBay. I use this camera primarily for street and portrait photography. In this video, I wanted to go over the basic characteristics of this camera and the advantages and disadvantages of this camera. This camera has an 18 megapixel full frame sensor. Now, most mirrorless cameras today have sensors with higher megapixels. For example, the Sony a7R has a 36.4 megapixel sensor. You can find this a7R body that is cheaper than the M-E body. But for me, 18 megapixels is good enough for my portrait and street photography, and I personally don't chase megapixels. All M-mount Leica lenses, old and new, are still good for use in this camera. You can manually select the lens you will be using in the menu if the lens does not have the 6-bit coding. One of the most unique characteristics of this camera is the sound of the shutter. It is loud and makes a cool motor-like sound. Some people don't like it, but I find it quite satisfying. So the advantages of using this camera. If you ever used a film Leica, this camera is an easy transition. My first Leica was the Leica M6 TTL, and the only thing I really had to learn on the M-E was how to change the ISO. Everything else felt very similar to the M6. The build quality is excellent like all Leicas. It feels robust and well balanced in your hands. I also do like the image characteristics produced by the CCD sensor. The images have a darker saturation that I quite like. Now, there are parts of the camera that do annoy me. The LCD screen on this camera is just terrible. Its image quality is that of an old flip phone. Its processor is also slow, so it might take some time loading and reviewing the shots you just took. But shooting film has taught me to get your settings right the first time, so I don't use my LCD screen too much to review the images. You are also limited on the type of SD cards you can use. Do not use any iFi cards in this camera. The bottom plate interferes with the Wi-Fi capability of the iFi cards, so it won't work. The camera also has a hard time detecting this card. Also, iFi actually states that using their card in Leica digital cameras may damage the camera. You also can't use SD XC cards in your M-E or M9 because they are not recognized by the camera. One of the cards that do work in this camera is the SDHC 45 megabytes per second card. Apparently this was addressed in a firmware update, but I don't really know what cards were part of that update. And the SDHC cards that I currently use, they work fine right now, so I haven't really worried about it. There's also a risk associated with buying this camera. It was discovered that the CCD sensor has the potential to corrode. Leica agreed to replace the corroded sensor for free, but they recently revised their policy on their sensor issue. Starting on August 16, 2017, the policy will be that if a customer purchased their Leica M-E or M9 earlier than August 16, 2012, he or she will need to pay $1,000 to have the sensor replaced. With all the problems that this camera has, I still like the camera and I will continue to use it until it dies. But if you're really worried about the sensor corrosion issue, save a bit more money and buy a used M240. But if you're willing to accept the risk, go ahead and buy the camera. It's quite the joy to shoot.